Hello everyone. Welcome. We are so glad you are here. So take a moment to settle in, grab a water, get comfortable. We will be starting in just a few minutes. Let us know where you are joining from. I am from Brazil. I am in Portugal right now. So, what about you guys? Let us know in the chat. I will give you a second to reply here. So, if you are watching this event in our website, Led by Community website, you can just go to the events tab here, I think, and check our upcoming events. So this Thursday, tomorrow, July 16th, the AI sharing notes is happening again. That's our weekly session. And in August 50, your community in person. So how to host a conference for your community. Sign up and enjoy it. So hi, Thomas. Hi, Serene. Akash is here, Timmy. Welcome, everyone. That's our very first session of leading communities with purpose. And as we go through the session, feel free to drop your questions in the chat, and we will gather them in the end because there will be a special time for this. I want to welcome Shaheryar here. Where are you? So Shaheryar Ajmal. He is the director of Alumni and Community at Alpha Lambda Mu, where he leads initiatives focused on alumni engagement and lifelong community. So today, Shaheryar will be sharing how to build alumni programs that create lasting connections beyond graduation. Welcome, Shaheryar. We are glad to have you here.
Hey,
How are
everyone. So
you
nice to
today?
meet you. I'm doing well. How are you? How's everyone else doing?
That's great. So over to you. See you later. Further questions.
Sounds good. So, yeah. Hi, everyone. My name is Shaheryar. I am the director of alumni and community at Alpha Lambda Mu. So just a little bit about me and my background. So, my name is Shaheryar. I actually work in technology as my full-time job, but for the last 4 years, I've been the director of alumni for ALM, and I recently changed my title to director of alumni and community as we're trying to focus more on community building, which is essential to building an alumni program. Just a little bit about my organization. So Alpha Lambda Mu is America's first Muslim interest fraternity. It was founded in 2013 in Dallas, and it was built to give essentially Muslim Americans a place to be, many different things at once. To have the positive elements of a fraternity without some of the things that compromise our values, such as drinking and hazing and all of that. So, that's a little bit about our organization. And before I joined, there was no alumni program at all. And, our community was on Slack, but there was not really any community focused initiatives. So, I was pretty much responsible for kind of, working with our team and helping build that from the ground up. So just to give you guys some context, right? What is an alumni program? So an alumni program is essentially the deliberate and ongoing effort to maintain a mutually valuable relationship with people who've already left. So most people think about it from universities, but it doesn't just have to be a university. It could be a course. It could even be like any type of program. It could be a club that you join, anything in which you were originally part of something. And then there was a quote unquote graduation where you have completed that said course or that said initiative or that said club. Now you transition towards being an alumni. And the real focus on alumni relations is maintaining connections both to the alumni and to the organization, providing something of value back to alumni, and then allowing your alumni to be advocates. They are the best marketers for whatever program or initiative that you're doing. And then support. right? So getting both time as well as donations from alumni. That is essentially what an alumni program is on a high level: facilitating connection, providing value, enabling your alumni to advocate for your organization, and enabling your alumni to support. One thing I want to say before I move on is that support is the output, not the input. In order to obtain support from your alumni, you have to provide them value first. And I think that's where a lot of alumni programs kind of fail. So the 5 kinds of alumni programs on a high level are academic, what we talked about, right? Like, universities and stuff. There's corporate alumni programs. So a lot of big companies like, McKinsey and Deloitte, they actually maintain relationships with the employees who've left. They normally have someone maintaining like an alumni program for previous employees. Membership organizations. So this is the one where I was responsible for. So these can be fraternities, sororities, or service clubs. Professional organizations like trade bodies and guilds also have some relationship to alumni programs, and cohort programs. So you can think about startup accelerators, right? If there's community programs, right, that people join temporarily, right, for a short amount of time, and then they leave, that's essentially an alumni program as well. Cool. So yeah, let's talk about the intangibility problem. So I think just before I go further, can you guys all hear me and everything like that correctly? I know I didn't really ask that in the chat, but if you guys can hear me and everything like that, just reply in the comments and stuff, just to make sure that everything is good. Okay. If you guys can't see the presentation or anything like that, let me know. Okay, super. Okay, thank you, Pam. Thank you for letting us know. Okay, so the thing with alumni programs, and this, if you can take anything away from the presentation, right, I would say this is one of the most unique things to take away. Alumni programs are different from other communities. The difference is that you're asking people to stay attached to something that they've already left. So if I join a community, right, such as Led By, or the community consultants or CMX or something, I'm joining that community because I see immediate value in it for me right now, right? There's a specific problem that it's solving for me, and there's value that's providing for it to me right now. Alumni programs are different because there's not necessarily an immediate value that exists. You're essentially asking people to stay connected to something that they've already left. So the problem is that how can you provide value and how can you provide relevance in their lives after they have left that alumni program? So the thing is that the issue with alumni programs is that people tend to drift, and no one really sends a breakup email. They just quietly stop opening your emails. The other thing that alumni professionals say is that, oftentimes there is weak engagement, and around 90% of alumni professionals agree that they need to improve their engagement. I'm going to skip over this slide a little bit, but because I already talked about it. But in terms of why alumni programs are important, yeah, your members become advocates. Community and networking is really important. Your alumni can help you mentor, and then they can also create a financial base. And then before I go into some of the stuff that we implemented for our own alumni program, one thing I want to highlight is that in your alumni program, you have this incredibly powerful tool, which is nostalgia, right? So if you join a community online, you don't necessarily have nostalgia for that community, right? You're joining it to solve an immediate problem. For alumni programs, nostalgia is a really powerful weapon because you've already provided them the value. That's why they joined whatever program you were doing. And you can leverage that nostalgia, right? But the problem with nostalgia is that it fades. And from what we've noticed, it tends to fade pretty drastically over 2 years. So this 2-year window is actually the best time to engage with your alumni, because these are people who already have, a strong affiliation with your organization, and they already have a strong sense of nostalgia because they just graduated from that organization. So if you're trying to recruit any members to become advocates for you, you have to do it essentially within the 2 to 3 year time frame window, because afterwards, right, the affiliation and nostalgia for that organization is going to fade. So this is what we So in terms of all of that, right, that was said, like the power of nostalgia, why alumni programs are important. Let me tell you kind of the stuff that we did that ended up helping us out a lot. So I'll cover each one of these, but on a high level, events were some of the things that we implemented that were the most important. So in-person events, they really build strong community, uh, and they do a much better job than just an online Slack channel or community. Um, the second thing that we implemented were conferences and national retreats. So these things, were really helpful because we host them once a year, and they're normally like highly planned, and like they bring people from across the nation together, and it really helps facilitate that alumni connection on a national level. We also implemented a newsletter, which is something that I advocate for pretty strongly. We also talk about like we had online events as well. Online events, like we're still trying to figure out how to make them a little bit more valuable, right? Like we haven't had the attendance that we would have wanted as much, but like it's been something that we've tried and we've had a good amount of people. And then the alumni directory, right? So the alumni directory is something that's super, super important for us, and I'll touch on it right away. Some of the two things that we tried that didn't really work out for us were mentorship programs and onboarding. So the mentorship programs, for example, they just require a lot of effort, and we've noticed is that people kind of like they drop after maybe 2 or 3 sessions of engaging with a mentor. Normally, those are things that require a lot of effort to execute properly, and you need mentors who are very dedicated and mentees who themselves are dedicated and they're not going to ghost their mentors. The other thing that we tried doing is that anytime someone became an alumni, we tried doing like an onboarding session with them, but we felt that wasn't as much value, just because, like if they join our Slack community, they're already going to get onboarded, right? They're going to see what, we could just essentially do like a message to them. Okay. So, yeah, before I asked that question, right, I think there was someone that asked, what kind of software do you guys use for the alumni community? So we use Slack as our primary channel for communication. So our Slack community is pretty active. Um, One thing that we have noticed about Slack communities, I'm on a lot of Slack communities, right? Alumni Slack communities are actually like very successful, and people are very engaged on them. This is something I've noticed that's unique from other Slack communities I've joined. And my assumption is that the nostalgia factor, right? People have already gotten value from whatever program or initiative that you have. So even if you put people together in a group chat, it's much more likely they're going to talk to one another. And it works very well for fraternities and sororities because everybody is already friends with one another. So it's interesting because I feel like the whole thing with community is that you start off with like some problem that you're trying to solve for your members and you're hoping that it goes towards friendship, right? But with, alumni associations or anything that's like a very in-person heavy focused thing, like a fraternity or a sorority, you actually start with friendship first and then you're trying to build a community on top of that. So the problem, it makes things a little bit easier actually, and it makes things a lot more engaged. So we use Slack as our software tool. We use, when I'll talk to the newsletter, I'll talk about it as well. But the other piece of software that we use is this platform called Community House. Full disclosure, it was something that I built out for my own community, and I have a couple of other friends using it. It's essentially a networking tool for members in your community. So one of the biggest benefits of an alumni program is networking, specifically like for organizations like cohort-based organizations or fraternities or sororities. The reason is because like everybody wants to up themselves in terms of their career. Everybody wants to, if they have a business, they want to figure out how to improve that business. You need to leverage the community to help you out to do that. So right now we have 600 alumni across the industries. And, we wanted to create a directory of our alumni where people can easily find one another. So, because on our Slack channel, we noticed people had a hard time finding specific people. If they wanted to find someone at a specific company, if they wanted to find someone in their business, it would be hard for them to do. So we just kind of built out a directory. It's like a chat GPT prompt where people could just type in what they're looking for, and it'll scan everybody's LinkedIn profile. And then, and tell, hey, by the way, Bob can help you out with like, figuring out how to grow your marketing agency or grow your community or anything like that. And it's been a successful initiative for us. And the reason why, I've also I remember I was laid off at a certain point, and it was literally only because of the alumni directory that we had, where I could reach out to people and they could refer me to they could refer me to their companies. The other reason why networking is so important is because if you just reach out to someone randomly on LinkedIn to help you out with your business, to help you out with your problem, to help you get a job, you're going to get a very low response rate. But we've noticed that in our alumni community, when you reach out to someone who is an alumni, the response rate is significantly higher. It's pretty high for universities, but on a personal level, when I've reached out to an ALM alumni for networking, my response rate has been 100%, which means that any person you ask in terms of asking for a job referral, in terms of asking you for help on a business, honestly, even if you're just trying to do lead gen, right, and you're trying to sell something to them, the response rate is like 100%. That's what it's been for me, and that's what it's been for many members that I've talked to in our community. So again, this is probably the biggest value add of any alumni community that you can add, is really the networking component. The other thing that we've hosted are events. So the way that we do events is we figure out where our alumni are on a certain map, right? So we have 600 alumni spread across the nation. We look at where clusters are for specific alumni, and based off of those clusters, we then go and essentially get an ambassador in each cluster, right? So we call them alumni chapters. It's similar to, I guess, how other communities would run. And then once a quarter, we have that alumni ambassador organize an event. We pay for that event, right? So we sponsor everybody $15 or $20, right? So we subsidize the event depending on what they do. And then we have the ambassador essentially get people together. And the thing is that with events, I mean, this is relatively standard, right? We use Luma for events, so we have an event calendar, and then we make sure that we have a really good database, so that any person we know in that specific area, we can just go ahead and then blast them a message to attend the event. And this has been really helpful for us because in-person events drive significantly more engagement than online engagement ever could. So when people are interacting with each other over pickleball or at a restaurant, or just a barbecue, people feel a lot more connected with one another, and it brings back the memories they had of that organization. That's what we've noticed, because oftentimes they see friends that they haven't seen in a while, or they see people from that organization that they've never met before at an event. So all of this ties back to kind of one, you provide them value, right? And the second thing you do is that you essentially ignite that nostalgia factor within them. Yeah, one question, this is a good one. How do you balance providing value to alumni without creating too much work for a small community team? Yeah, this is a really good question. The way that we provide value is that you have to figure out the stuff that is the most important and only focus on those things. So for example, when we first started our alumni program, we would do a bunch of different things, right? We would do, we would try doing in-person events. We would try doing virtual events. We do onboarding and everything. And after experimenting with a bunch of different things, we realized that really events are the things that are the most important, right? So the things that we dropped were our mentorship program, our onboarding, all of that, and we would only focus on events. So it's really just, I would say, experiment first, right? And then figure out what's the most important, and then only focus on those things. In terms of practical tips on how to organize an in-person networking session and facilitate connections with people. Yeah, so in terms of practical tips, Tomas, I hope I'm pronouncing that name right. In-person networking sessions, this is similar to just organizing any event in general. I would say networking sessions are probably the best to do online for alumni teams specifically, just because unless you have a very large group of alumni, it's hard to get everybody in a specific, like, vertical or domain, like engineering or medicine or everything like that, in the same location. But if you do want to host an in-person event, the first thing for networking, the first thing I would do is, plan in advance who, like, what that event is going to be. Make sure you have all your planning done at least 2 months in advance. And then the second thing to do is that you have a list of all of your members, right? And then just make sure that you start blasting out your event at least 1 month to all of those members that you want to attend the networking session. This was a big problem for us because oftentimes we would blast events maybe 2 weeks out, and we realized 2 weeks was not enough of a notice, and we had significantly higher people attend when we did at least 1 month notice in advance. And then in terms of like, the thing is with networking events, don't think too much about it. Literally just do a coffee shop. Like, you'd be surprised how, like, you want something to be relatively low commitment for people where they can attend. The only time you want to do higher commitment level events, right, where it takes a lot longer time or more effort, is when you've already built that community out. So if your community is kind of like not super active, right, do things simple and just give at least a month's notice. And then if your community is something that's more active, then you can essentially still give a month's notice, but you can do something a little bit more ambitious. Okay, cool. So the next thing I want to talk about is our conference. So we host one conference every year, and we kind of host it across the country. The focus of our conference is essentially on prophetic masculinity, right? So that's really the goal of ALM, is to essentially help all of our members increase their game in terms of spirituality, in terms of their business, in terms of the brotherhood. And all of that, like, kind of coalesces into a multi-day conference that we host. This has probably been the biggest relationship driver for us, because people, not only do you provide them value from the conference attendance, you also have them meet one another, and you also have them meet one another for multiple days. So this is a high commitment event, right? Because it requires people to fly out. It requires people to spend a lot of their time. So this is one of those things where it would require a lot of marketing, and you have to at least let people know 3 to 6 months in advance. But every conference that we've done, like, it's just insane in terms of the reconnection that people have towards the organization. If you can have conferences for your alumni program, I would highly recommend it. Even if you just have a community that's not an alumni program, I would 100% recommend conferences. They are very, very high effort, but if you are able to execute them, these are single-handedly the best initiatives that you can do for your community. And the thing is that, like, I can spend a lot of time talking about this, right? But the way that we plan and organize it is we figure out what our theme is. So our theme is always prophetic masculinity. And then we figure out kind of the verticals, right? So we want to have people speak about spirituality. We want to have people speak about, like, careers, finances, entrepreneurship. So we have our conference speaker let out. Then we start advertising this 6 months in advance to all of our members. In an absolute ideal world, we want every single alumni to attend the conference, because we know that this conference is an activation event. If someone attends one of our conferences, they are activated for our community for an entire year. So we're like, how can we, like, if this is like, if you could funnel all of your members towards like one activation event, it would probably be the conference, because they're gonna be thinking about that conference for months out afterwards. And the way that you get as many people to that conference is you advertise it, and then you sort of have to figure out who are the people in your community that know many other people. So for example, if there's someone, part of the organization who used to be a previous chapter president, he is someone that's going to be very well connected. I need to reach out to him months in advance and make sure that he is able to attend. And I'm going to personally pick up the phone and call them. That's how some of the best marketing works for conferences. And then once you have 20 highly engaged people, they can reach out to their friends, and they can reach out to their friends. And all of a sudden you have many people attend your conference. I think oftentimes where conferences fail is the marketing doesn't happen early enough. and they normally don't create a list of those power users, right? They kind of just try to blast it on their newsletter. But you really have to go and call people, and you want to call the people who are the most well connected. And once you do that, then you'll have like many people attend your conference. Over here, you can just see like some sessions that we've hosted, and long story short, people get very close with one another. So the goal is you need to figure out how you can get everyone towards this conference. That happens by being disciplined and by being early. So yeah, the thing with our conference, every time we've hosted it, a lot of the people came for the content, and the community happened as a byproduct, right? On our post, on our Slack channels, right? People would be posting about how they're having like withdrawals from conference just because they got to meet so many people. One thing I would say about conferences is that, especially for alumni programs, you need to balance content with like socialization. One mistake conferences do is that they go really hard on the content, and they don't create enough ways for just fun stuff to happen, right? So for example, when we hosted a conference in Chicago, we were like, hey, let's have let's end the conference a little bit early, and then just have all of our members go towards to the cities, to the city of Chicago, and just hang out. And when you do that, right, people are not super destroyed from the conference, and they're able to actually socialize with one another and have a good time, and that's what facilitates community. Again, the best communities are essentially where your acquaintances are friends with people, and that happens, and you just got to make sure that you take time out for that. In terms of our newsletter, right? So the newsletter is something pretty interesting. There's two things that you should do with the newsletter. The first one is, how can I capitalize on nostalgia, right? Because what you essentially want to show them the ways to where they can reignite the love that they had for the organization. So with ALM, right, we were a college fraternity. Oftentimes we include things in the newsletter that are things that the current chapter students are doing. So for example, if there's a service event that a specific member did, right, that a specific chapter did, let's just say the Dallas ones, we highlight that in the newsletter. If there's something that an award that a member won, right? So let's just say one of the ALM members, they won a hackathon or something like that. Those are things that we want to showcase in the organization. So the whole point is to kind of reignite the love that they had by kind of showcasing the strength and accomplishments of that organization. So that's one thing that you have to do. The second thing you have to do is, how can you provide them value in the moment? This one is a little bit harder, right? And it's possible not every single newsletter can provide value in the moment. But what we've tried doing has been anytime there are jobs postings, we post those jobs in our newsletter. That's pretty helpful. We also highlight our alumni, right? So for example, if there's an alumni one of our alumni recently published a book, right? So we're going to be highlighting him in our newsletter as well. And then any members who are interested in writing, right, they can go ahead and reach out directly towards him. Edwin, yeah, good question. What's a realistically reasonable frequency of sending newsletters to avoid email fatigue? I think once a month is good. Anything less than once a month, I think, will cause too much fatigue, or more than once a month in terms of frequency. But I think anything less, is not going to show relevance. If you don't have content every month, right, then you can't do it once a month. But I would say once a month is good, because you want to, especially with alumni programs, you want to show them the success of your organization, because the nostalgia fades. So every time you show them that success of the organization, even if it's on a frequent basis, they, it'll remind them of the nostalgia. That's one thing we've noticed. One problem we had was that we would send out newsletters every 3 months, and it was just too little. When we started sending them out more frequently and everything like that, anecdotally, people would mention that they really like that for us. All right. So I'm just going to go ahead and answer some of the questions in the chat real quick, because I know I didn't have time to do that when I was going through the presentation, but I still have some content, but I'd like to just answer some questions real quick. So Yeah, Will Allen, what would be some ideal ways to gain interest in the community space for alumni if you are just getting started with a first-time community? Um, so what would be some ideal ways to gain interest in the community space? Yeah, so if you are, I guess if you're just trying to start, uh, if yeah, from what I understand at least, it sounds like you just want to start a like how can you start an alumni program, right? Uh, or I think it's how can you get alumni programs interested in community? This is a really hard question or a hard problem to solve, and the reason is because I think alumni people don't immediately think about community, even though that they should. So if you're trying to get alumni people to focus more on community, um, it's you essentially first have to show them the value that community will add into their alumni program. And the question is, what value can you show? Alumni programs tend to care a lot about fundraising, right? That's one thing I've noticed from pretty much every alumni program. If you can tie in how community development can raise into to fundraising, that's going to be your biggest bet and your biggest leverage. Um, and how you show that I think is a little bit challenging, right? Because with community, right, it's like the ROI, it's a huge ROI, but it's always sometimes it's hard to show immediately. So if you can give them very tangible things like, hey, you have an alumni program, I'm going to build a community for it. This is what I'm going to do, right? I'm going to launch a Slack. I'm going to, determine which members are the most active. Once you figure out which members are the most active, it's really easy to tie that back into fundraising. So that's what I would do if I was trying to get, alumni programs more interested in community. Tie it back to fundraising, and the easiest way to do that is by pinpointing which alumni are the most engaged, and then that could help out with fundraising. Next question is most communities are held together by ongoing shared experiences. Alumni programs have the opposite problem. What's actually holding an alumni community together in 5 years was nostalgia has worn off? Yeah, that's like a phenomenal question. Um, so the way we handle this is we're pivoting our, I guess, positioning more from, alumni program to becoming a community for people of prophetic masculinity, right? Um, the whole origin story of ALM was to make sure that, we can be the best men that we can be. And prophetic masculinity is something that is a lot more tangible for alumni to grasp than previous experiences from college. So you would have to pivot the positioning of your community to something that's more tangible. It's easier to do for organizations like us because fraternities and sororities are always focused on producing like the best amount of people. So you would essentially focus on having a theme that is something central and something easy for people to find value in, even as alumni. But the one thing I want to highlight is you you should still capitalize on nostalgia, because you'd be very surprised at, like, if you provided a great experience in your program, you'd be very surprised at how, like, the positive memories still exist for that program. And the way you can keep that nostalgia strong is by hosting, is by the stuff I mentioned earlier, by having newsletters, by hosting consistent events, by having conferences. Those are things that if you do, the nostalgia doesn't really wear off, right? It might, it might decrease and then it'll plateau if you're successful. So people will still have that nostalgia as if you're posting good things about your events, and if you're going to the, and if you're posting things on the newsletter. So that's how I would answer that question, right? So pivot towards a theme which is understandable that alumni can focus on. So if I was like a startup organization or something like that, right, and I had people graduate from my program, I would have my theme be something like, oh, like business development, right? Yeah, you originally joined for the startup accelerator, but now we have a community of people that are focused on business development for startups, right? So the value exists beyond that specific program. I hope that answers that question. D Brown, you're a PM by day. How much of that thinking transfers? Do you look at the alumni program the way that you look at a product? Yeah, I would say a good amount of that transfers over. It was a little bit different for me though, because I was building the alumni program from the ground up. When you're a product manager, you sort of like already have a product. So it's easy to like, you already have the infrastructure, right? So if you want to pull analytics on something, if you want to go talk to users, you can do that. If you're building a community from the ground up, it's like a different set of challenges that you have. It's more similar to what founders might have, right? Like you got to, talk to a bunch of people and everything. I would say that my work on community development has actually impacted the way that I think as a PM, actually more. And it's definitely interesting. But I think that the biggest thing that I would say that I learned as a product manager was talking to your users. And that's the best thing that you can do for an alumni program is you have to talk to your alumni. So I would say that's the biggest takeaway. Aisha, have you found any engagement formats that consistently bring alumni back, even if they haven't participated in months? Yeah, events I think are probably the best. And then I think if you can get them to come to an event, then like that format is going to is probably the best in terms of bringing alumni back. If you can funnel them to a conference, that's really good. The thing with the conference is that I remember there were alumni who had like not been active at all, right, for a very long time, and I just picked up the phone and called them, and then they were down to come to conference. And after they came to conference, they were a lot more connected with the community. They were a lot more connected with the members of the organization, and they became a lot more active online too. So figure out what your one activation event is, and then just try and then just try to funnel everything to that. And for us, it was our conference. One last thing before I move on is that there are some alumni that like, it's like any community, no matter how much you're gonna try, they're just not going to be affiliated with the organization. It's not about focusing on the, like, it's not about focusing on those people. It's figuring out how can I get 10% of my community, my alumni community, to be like very involved and very active. And then the 50% of people who are on the fence, how can I occasionally get them involved too? Okay. If someone's staring at a dormant list right now, a spreadsheet of thousands of people who haven't heard from them in 2 years, what's the first move, not the strategy? Okay. First move that I would do, if I had a list of 1,000 people that I haven't heard back a very long time, I would send them out an email. And then I would just send an email out saying, hey, like, are you still interested in the program or whatever, right? I could even send them a survey, right? If I want to see them engaged. And then I'll see how many people get engaged. If only 50 of 100 people, 50 of 1,000 people respond to my email, I know those are 50 engaged members. So the first thing is to figure out which members are engaged. And when you have a massive list, the thing that you would have to do is send an email out with a survey, ideally, not super long, maybe like 3 questions, right? 3 to 4 questions. Honestly, you could, one thing that's worked for certain communities too is that they just send an email out saying, hey, if you're still interested in if you're still interested in being a part of the community, just respond to this message. See how many people respond. And then once you have those members, you can build out your community from those members. The next thing I would do is schedule a call with every single person who responds. When you schedule a call with them, ask them about problems that they face, why are they still connected to the community, everything like that. But that would be my strategy for starting. Okay. Richard Millington asked, there's a version of alumni engagement where someone surfaces once every 18 months and it matters enormously to them. Standard engagement metrics would call that person churned. So how do you actually measure success here? Yeah, that's a really good question. We're still working on trying to figure out the best metrics for us. One thing that I would say is that person who surfaces once every 18 months, like that might be an outlier in the sense where, like Okay, so this is how I'd start off with our metric strategy. Figure out which people are the most engaged. And then you can do that by looking at your Slack channel and figuring out the people that come to events, right? Once you have a list of people who like come to events at least once a year, who come to your conferences, who are like, at least posting once a month on Slack, you can have your list of people. That person who shows up once every 18 months, it's going to be hard for you to figure out, like, because they're not going to show up in your standard like success metrics list. Um, but I think what you have to do is just know that information on like on a case by case basis, right? These are the people that are engaged, and there's someone who's engaged that doesn't meet this specific criteria, right? So I will just have to keep track of that person as an engaged member, like on a separate list or via a separate framework that I have. Um, and like that's I think that's the best way we handle it, because it's hard to measure success completely with a framework. Your framework can cover about 80% of like your engaged members, but the last 20%, I think you sort of just have to like keep a track of like in unscalable ways. Okay, cool. How much time do we have left? Okay, so I'm just going to there's a couple of more questions left. I'm just gonna kind of like finish the slide so I can continue to the other questions. But yeah, so we already talked a little bit about this, right? For your alumni program, you need to have an anchor. So what is going to keep people engaged with your alumni program afterwards, right? So if I have to summarize this slide, the idea is that figure out what that anchor is. For large organizations like universities, it's hard because they have such a huge base of people. If you're running a university alumni program, it's better to have multiple communities, right? With like, specific tangible goals to cater to the needs of your whole base. If you have a smaller organization like a fraternity or a professional organization, you could have like you could have just like essentially one community with a specific goal that exists beyond your particular program. When it comes to fundraising, this is something that's very important. Fundraising strategy for alumni programs, like the people that donate the most are essentially going to be like a lot of your funds are going to come from a very small group of high frequent donors. That's one thing that we've noticed. We have a couple of members who are really dedicated to the organizations who've donated a lot. And like I think that's normally just what we've seen from fundraising. One thing that I would recommend for any alumni program is provide value first before you ask for funds. And the second thing is that we did a membership fee. Actually, it's just like a small it's like a small donation, and we give people a gift if they donate literally $5 a month, right? And that's not going to cover a huge amount of your base. If you're getting $5 a month from like a couple hundred people versus like your top donors giving like $10,000 a month or $10,000 in and as a one-time donation, or $15,000 as a one-time donation, that's going to like it might not make up that much, but having a small fee helps you figure out which alumni are seeing value. Because if alumni don't see any value at all, they themselves wouldn't pitch in like $2, $3, or $4. But for $5 a month is something most people can afford. So like if they themselves donate that, that's an engaged alumni. So that's a strategy that we've done. But yeah, in terms of like if you want donations, figure out who are the most engaged members. If you have a database of your members and where they work, you can essentially figure out which members are essentially high earners potentially. Develop relationships with them, and then once you develop relationships with them, it's easier to get them to donate. So fundraising is more of like a long-term strategy when it comes to especially getting donors. And then the other thing I would say is figure out which companies match fundraising. So this was a strategy we did where we saw that, hey, specific companies match donations. So then you try to get donations from those alumni because you'll get double the amount of revenue because the companies will match that donation. And then what we're trying to do now with our alumni program is really go from alumni to community, right? Because I think community is the most sustainable way to keep an alumni program strong and growing. because you provide value to your members. So from switching from the ALM alumni program, where we're going towards, how can we build prophetic masculinity, and how we can essentially be the best men possible. So it's essentially transforming it into a community of people who are always focused on upping their game spiritually, materially, and their business. And when you kind of position your alumni program to a community that provides value like this afterwards, it's probably the best way to re-engage alumni who are not as engaged and prevent alumni from falling off or having only the affiliation as nostalgia. Cool. So yeah, I will continue then with the questions on the list. Anyone in the crowd? Yeah, a small community. What are the best practice considerations for leveraging alumni as volunteers, ambassadors to get more hands on deck? Okay, I think this question was already. Okay, yeah. So yeah, CG McCoy. So I would say to figure out who would be an ambassador, you have to figure out which alumni are the most active and which alumni are the most engaged. So I would say that would be your first bet, right? Which alumni are the most active and engaged? And you can do that by, if you have a Slack channel, it's really easy. You can just go into metrics and see which ones are posting the most. If you have a newsletter, right? Which members are consistently opening, which members are consistently clicking, right? By seeing members who click and actually open links, it's actually a pretty good way to see who's more engaged with your content. Who's attending conferences more, right? Who's attending events? Just keep track of all of this data to figure out who are your most engaged members. And what we've noticed is that the most engaged members tend to be the best ambassadors. How do you decide which conversations belong in the alumni community versus the current student or member community? Yeah, well, right now our alumni and our student community is the same. They're all on the same Slack channel and stuff. If you have a university, I'm sure it's a little bit different, right? Because you have significantly more members, right? And I think at that point, it's just separating out, making sure students can't enter the community and alumni can enter the community. But I don't think you need to separate them. I mean, a lot of times what we've noticed is that the content is really useful, right, for both members. And you don't want to create a really strong rift between students and alumni, right? If students and alumni can talk to one another in their Slack community, people post questions, people post memes. If they're all engaging with each other's content, right? That's good because now students feel more connected to alumni feel more connected to the organization. So I wouldn't think that you should separate them, right? I don't think you need to have a reason to do that. Have you seen organizations successfully involve alumni in co-creating programs for events rather than just attending them? If so, what made it work? I think I have a hard time understanding this question. If you're saying organizations recruiting alumni in terms of doing joint events, that we haven't necessarily done that. So with ALM, we've done partnerships, but they've been more done on a student level, right? So the fraternity partners with another organization inside inside the school, right, or inside the university to do a joint event together, and that normally works pretty well. If you want to, and it's just pretty standard, right? People just team up and they do something. For alumni, in terms of co-creating programs or events, I think we haven't done that, but it's on our list. But if we do an event with another organization and we want our alumni to attend, then you just essentially market it as a partnership, and then you reach out to the members who might be interested. And that's normally the way that it would work. I don't think there's too much of a difference in terms of co-creating event with another organization and hosting it yourself. I think most of the same principles are going to apply if you want members involved. You essentially just have to do outreach And then depending on what the event is, the members who are engaged will work. So I don't think there's too much of a difference in terms of co-creating an event.
Yay, I think that's it so far. So if you have any questions for Shaheryar, we have a few minutes left. And I have a question for you. So if you could give one piece of advice to someone launching an alumni community or program this year in the second semester, what would it be?
Yeah, I would say if you had to launch it completely from the ground up, figure out if you can start by creating a community right away, right? And you figure out a theme or something like that. So if it's a university program or alumni program, I would just say that whatever that theme is, right? Center your community around that. And then the specific members, and then have a communication channel set immediately. I really like Slack because we've just been using it, but like frankly, if you just want to do something very bootstrap, you can just do a WhatsApp channel, right? So pick a theme, right? If it's like, I'm just going to use Led By as an example, right? So if Led By is launching a program and they have an alumni community, it could be, continuous community development, community strength, or whatever. Have a Slack channel, have a WhatsApp group or something like that. Start and then blast it out to people. The people who join your community, those are going to be your active, engaged alumni, right? You can tell that they're actively engaged right now. So it's just important. And then once you have that active and engaged program, I would say focus on pushing out relatively good content surrounding your theme. And like when you do that, on top of that, like having host like one virtual session where people can get to know one another. That's what I would say from the ground up. The thing with alumni programs is it's really important to know who your engaged alumni are. So when you're starting it from the ground up, like you have to develop relationships with each one of those engaged alumni, because you also don't, and then post surveys to figure out what your alumni want, right? What do they want from the community? It's possible your alumni don't even care about the content. They just want to hang out with one another, right? So like then you just need that completely changes the strategy of what you'll implement. So if I have to kind of like synthesize it down, is create a communication channel, right? That's very important. See the people who join are your engaged alumni. Figure out what they want, right? And then figure out what they loved about the organization. One thing we noticed is that people love the friendships that they developed in the organization. So it's like, if that was the thing that they really enjoyed, how can we capitalize on that, right? Okay, they really enjoyed the friendships. How can we host events where we can get people together? Some people, if they really enjoyed the spiritual development, they felt closer connection to God or to whatever religion that they followed. Well, that's going to change my strategy. I might have a speaker event. So, but yeah, the communication channel is important. So,
Yeah, yes, that's really helpful, and I agree. So one last question from Akash here. I was wondering, what do alumni programs get to take for granted that a SaaS or interest-based community has to fight for? And what is the trade-off for that?
yeah, the best thing is that like the nostalgia. One is the nostalgia factor, and two is the relationships, right? In alumni communities, right? People have a nostalgia. Like you've already provided them the value. The value is there. Like they joined the program, and if they decided to join your alumni community or whatever, they have you've essentially shown them the value already. The second thing is that the relationships. Oftentimes in alumni programs, people, like even if it's a university, people develop very strong friendships with that organization. So they have an emotional connection to that organization. SaaS communities do not have, like, literally no one has an emotional connection to a SaaS community. So like that's like the best thing that your alumni community has. And it's the reason why I think our Slack channel had actually a lot of engagement even before we developed the alumni program, right? And it was because of the relationships that were developed and the emotional connection that people had. And what, you would have, the problem is that stuff is declining, right? And how can you stay relevant to them? SaaS communities can stay relevant, right? It's like the opposite thing. They can stay relevant to people. Because people join the community because they're using your software or something. So I would say that's the trade-off, right? People have an emotional connection with your organization and the relationships, but it's nostalgic, it's fading. SaaS communities provide possible immediate solutions, but they don't have that emotional connection. The thing with SaaS communities is how can you help develop that emotional connection with people? And it's never about your software. It's going to be about the events and the people. And with alumni programs, the thing is that how can you provide them immediate value that goes beyond the nostalgia?
Yes. Thank you, Shaheryar. So thank you for joining us today, for sharing your expertise. It was really helpful. People love it. They were saying thank you in the chat. And if you want to stay connected with Shaheryar, I am sharing his LinkedIn profile in the chat. Join Lambda community to connect with other community builders and access resources. And thanks for joining us. Let's keep building together. See you next time.
Take care, everyone. Bye.